Welcome to the Disability Squeeze. Our guest today is Delegate Aaron M. Kaufman, a disability rights advocate and member of the Maryland House of Delegates, representing District 18 in Montgomery County. He's also the first member of the Maryland General Assembly with cerebral palsy. Aaron and I are the same age, though I wouldn't say exactly how old we are. I'll say that you are much more accomplished than me, Aaron, and it's great to speak with a fellow millennial and someone who's been at the forefront of disability advocacy in state government. So welcome to the Disability Squeeze.
It's an honor to be with you, Professor.
So you have quite an impressive legislative track record, having sponsored or co-sponsored 50 bills, 20 of which became law. And one of your legislative accomplishments really caught my eye was a bill that allows parents who successfully sue their school system on behalf of their child with a disability to be reimbursed for legal fees. Legal costs like this are common that disabled families often incur. And I'm curious to know how this issue first came on your radar and how you think this law will impact families with children with disabilities in Maryland.
I am very happy to answer that question. That was in my first year as a legislator in 2023. And just to correct the record a little bit, it's already established in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that legal fees have to be covered. But when I was talking to parents and advocates, is that the expert witness fees, at least where I live in the state of Maryland, were $1,500 a day or more. And I talked to one parent, for example, that to pay for the expert witnesses had to do a bake sale for her daughter. And it's already a rigged system because of the fact that school systems have built-in psychologists, built-in OTs, PTs, speech therapists, built-in academic specialists. And so the parents have to go out and hire all of this. And that's why from 2014 to 2019, school systems in the state of Maryland won 85% of the cases. That translates to the fact that the parents only won about 15 cases. And most parents have to engage in pro se representation, which means they represent themselves because lawyers can be $50,000 to $80,000 or something similar. And so I was just trying to level the playing field for people after hearing about how often fighting for your kids leaves parents destitute, and how if by some miracle you win, you got your legal fees, but not your expert witness fees, and how expensive those were. I wanted to right that wrong, but in fairness, my colleague Leslie Lopez, who represents another area of Montgomery County in the state House of Delegates, had tried to introduce that bill and just passed the baton to me because it was fiercely opposed by the Maryland Association of the Boards of Education, because they said the same canard that they always do, which is it's going to lead to more litigation. But the fact is that in the state of Delaware, they already had this law that you had to reimburse not only for legal fees, but expert witness fees, and litigation did not increase. So David beat Goliath on this one, and I'm very happy to have that extra support for parents in what's a very difficult situation.
It's like the situation now where the Trump administration is complaining about all these legal cases against them and using that, saying that's a sign of overly litigious society. But on the other hand, they're saying, no, that's actually a sign of the lack of ethics and illegal activity going on in the administration. And I'm wondering, have you seen a increase in litigiousness? And if we did, would we say that would necessarily be a bad thing?
I think more parents know their rights, but but let's be clear, most parents can't afford to litigate, and that's why I've talked to numerous parents who said they couldn't afford to sue, so they just decided to homeschool their children. But I think it's a function of the fact that if we're seeing more litigation, it's because there's a greater incidence of disability. For example, Zach, as I'm sure the CDC just came out and said 1 in every 36 8-year-olds has autism. And so therefore, there are more students with disabilities than there used to be. And I also think school systems are becoming more rigid about, they try to cut corners at every level about not providing services. And that's why the case Andrew F. versus Douglas County School System went all the way to the Supreme Court a number of years ago, because the Douglas County School System in Colorado was arguing all that IDEA required them to do was make de minimis progress. But Chief Justice Roberts, I think, rightly said, no, that's not the case, and raised the bar for IDEA compliance.
Okay.
And I think, but I
More
am very,
generally, go ahead.
I am very
Yes.
concerned about with the closure of the education department, what's going to happen to IDEA enforcement, because there was a whole branch of the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education that did IDEA enforcement, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which, for your listeners who don't eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff like we do, Zach, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it requires that students like me with CP and numerous other disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education. And it's celebrating 50 years this year. But I'm very worried that enforcement it's just going to be an empty piece of paper, because the Department of Education is essentially closing. Now they say they're going to move the civil rights enforcement to HHS, but I'll believe it
Right.
when I see it.
Will lawsuits be another alternative to that? Will that have to will there just need to be an increase in civil complaints, or?
I don't know if there will be, because it's a fortune to sue a
Right.
school
The
system. For example,
barriers to it.
I know a family that spent $80,000 on a lawyer and they lost. So I don't know if there will be, because it's just so expensive. But we'll see what happens.
So we could probably imagine that for all the lawsuits that do happen, and we're talking about education, but for people with disabilities, legal expenses can, for example, going on Social Security, often you need an attorney. That's a different legal avenue.
ADA lawsuits.
ADA lawsuits, right? Lawsuits. That for every lawsuit that happens, there are probably many others that don't happen that probably should or could happen, but are unaffordable to people. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you're exactly right. And one other thing that I want to just say about ADA enforcement is, the last time President Trump was in office, the House of Representatives passed the ill-named ADA Education and Reform Act. If your listeners have insomnia this evening, they can look up HR 620 from 2018. And what that would do is shift the burden of compliance of the ADA from the business that has had 35 years almost to comply to people with disabilities, because what it would require somebody with a disability to do is, they would, if there's an architectural barrier, they would have to let the business know that they couldn't get in their facility or something wasn't accessible, and then give them 100 or like 80 days to fix it, a grand total of 120 days before you could sue, or and people could comply if they made substantial progress fixing a barrier. But if you have 8 steps or 6 steps, I still can't get in. So what constitutes a substantial progress? And I think the belly aching of businesses is malarkey, because there are numerous tax credits that businesses can take advantage of to make their businesses accessible. And also, when Congress passed the ADA in 1990, they knew people would have questions. So every region of the country has an ADA Technical Assistance Center, whereby you can get advice on how to comply or what to do. For example, where I live in the state of Maryland, we have the ADA Mid-Atlantic Technical Assistance Center, which covers Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, and DC. And so there are ample opportunities to get resources to make your business ADA compliant. But the ADA Education Reform Act, which passed the House during
Mhm.
Trump 1, shifts the burden of compliance to people with disabilities, which I think is abhorrent, particularly because anything built before 1992 doesn't have to be accessible, and people have had ample time to comply. And you only have to make renovations if it's readily achievable.
All right. So I see that you've sponsored several other bills. You're really a very accomplished legislator and particularly on disability issues. For example, I saw that you have currently a pending bill on repairing mechanical wheelchairs. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this bill,
It'll be
which is
signed tomorrow by Governor
oh,
Moore, my governor.
congratulations.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm excited about this bill. I partnered with State Senator Cheryl Kagan on it because of the fact that I use a power chair. And when your power chair breaks, I use a walker for short distances and then a scooter or a power chair. But I didn't do it for myself. But my own experience has taught me that when you are a power chair user and it breaks, therefore it's like your legs are broken because you can't get to work, you cannot get to socialize with your friends. It just inhibits your ability to be part of the fabric of your community. And Sari can fill me in on the exact data, but I think we found that from this organization PIRG, that like 60% of power wheelchair users wait have to wait 4 weeks for their wheelchair repair, and then a whole other array of people have to wait 7 or 8 weeks, and then also my own power chair is broken in Annapolis a couple times. I was really motivated to do this, and because of the PIRG study and my own power chair and my scooter breaking in Annapolis. And so I really, yes, and Sari can put the report in the chat if she's able. And US PIRG has a whole report on this. So based on my own experience, Cheryl and I modeled our legislation, which will be signed tomorrow, based on something that was done already in Colorado. Numerous states have this, and we decided we wanted to bring it to Maryland.
And tell me about it. What is it exactly?
What the bill would do is it requires that manufacturers give local repair shops access to parts and codes and other things so that people can get their wheelchairs repaired locally rather than having to mail it off to the manufacturer, because that was the biggest part of the delay, because the manufacturers have significant monopoly and
Right.
people were at the will of these manufacturers. And so one of the reasons I did it is it helps small businesses and it allows you to get your wheelchair repaired locally so you'll get it back faster. And also people wanted the ability to have friends fix their chairs. And so a lot of this also enables people to engage in DIY if they have a handy friend, because wheelchair repairs are very expensive.
That's right. So this will expand access to wheelchair mechanics, basically, and repairs
Yeah.
for your population. So what an essential service. And I will cite this report in the podcast link.
Yes, and Mary PIRG which is the Maryland chapter of PIRG.
What is PIRG, Aaron?
I forget what it's
Oh,
called, and I'm
okay, I'll
focused
look
on
it up.
talking to you right now, but you can
Okay,
just
don't worry.
Google it.
I'll Google it.
And they, Public Interest Research Group.
Yep.
And so they testified in support of my bill written wise. And then we also had some consumer advocates, and I was deeply honored that somebody from the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's office, Steve Sakamoto Wangle, testified in favor of it too.
Congratulations. Will you be there for the signing?
I will.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll find a picture of you tomorrow and put
Yeah,
it on
we can send it to you.
Okay, that would be great. That would be
And
great.
Sari's going to be there too.
Congratulations. So my next question for you is, you're currently a politician. Before this role, you were a full-time disability justice advocate, and maybe you still call yourself that today.
Actually, this wasn't my first political job.
Okay.
I was on the governing body, the county and state Democratic parties in my state, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Maryland State Democratic Central Committee for 12 years, and then I moved up to the House of Delegates. But
So you've been in a political role a while. Go ahead.
So politics has always been my sport because I couldn't play sports. So I first started volunteering on campaigns when I was 8.
That's awesome. Okay. So here, then my question is, what lessons would you share with disability advocates and researchers like myself about how to best elevate an issue like the extra cost of disability and translate it into real legislative changes?
Be vulnerable and share your stories. I say it half jokingly, but only half. That one of the reasons that I'm a disability advocate is because it's cheaper than therapy. But I think one of the reasons that I've been able to move the needle is that I've been very open with my colleagues about my challenges. And I think beyond legislation, this seems immodest and I don't mean it to, but I really think that I've changed the House of Delegates a little bit because now lobbyists are not having dinners where they take our committees out in accessible places. And my colleagues have a deeper understanding of the daily challenges that people with disabilities face just hanging out with me. I also think that it's important for people with disabilities to be in high level positions because too many people in society feel that people with disabilities can only succeed at what we call in the disability rights movement the 4 F's: food, flowers, filing, and filth. When I tell people that I graduated from the University of Maryland, they say, "Oh, God bless you. What an inspiration." And I want them to expect that people with disabilities can achieve at a high level, in particular, even people with, not even, but people with intellectual disabilities too, because of the life programs. I don't know if you saw on the Today Show this morning, there was um, a story about a woman with Down syndrome who graduated the Clemson Life program. Her father's the president, and it's a program for people with intellectual disabilities to have a college experience. In Maryland, we call that TERP Succeed. And so there are numerous opportunities for people with physical disabilities like me to go to college, but also people with more significant needs like intellectual disabilities, etc. So anyway,
So, for example, I have ideas on we and members of my research team. We've been working for a long time to estimate and basically count how much it costs to live with a disability in the U.S. And we think, for example, that the way that we're estimating poverty in this country undercounts poverty for people with disabilities because it neglects to adjust for their out-of-pocket costs. Costs more for a person with a disability to live than it does a person without a
it
disability
absolutely does.
on average. And one thing that we're discussing is what are the legislative avenues that we could explore to advocate for on this issue. And we're looking at various benefit programs and formulas. And
Well, I don't mean to
just
cut you off, but
go
in
ahead,
my
please
in my
do.
day
Yeah.
job, I advocated for the Able Age Adjustment Act, which took 7 years to pass. But you know what an Able Act is, but it allows people with disabilities and their families to save for disability-related expenses like medications, physical therapy, co-pays, whatever they need, without risking their SSI and Medicaid benefits. But when it originally passed in 2014, you had to have acquired your disability before the age of 26. But
26.
thanks
Okay.
to the efforts of the disability community, that is now 46. They lifted the age cap 20 years, Senator Casey did. And as such, 6 million more people can open ABLE accounts. I mentioned that on your podcast because many parents and people with disabilities that I talk to don't know about ABLE accounts because it's been so ingrained in their head. Don't put anything in your child's name. Now you can.
First of all, thank you for your leadership on that. And second of all, I hope everyone should know about ABLE accounts, right?
At your front door.
Yeah, but
Well,
many people don't.
many people don't know. And I think that's one of the real weaknesses of ABLE are that people don't know about it. And also that it requires people to have savings to put in their ABLE accounts.
But even
Many people don't.
$100 or something can
Can help. And so I think we're interested in exploring how SNAP benefit eligibility could be adjusted, how Medicaid eligibility could be adjusted, or what would be a pie in the sky disability cost adjustment in our social welfare system.
I don't think we have the luxury of thinking about that respectfully,
Right
because
now, we certainly don't.
the Trump administration wants to cut back SNAP, and 26% of SNAP recipients are people with
Right.
disabilities. And by a wide margin, people with disabilities and families with a person with a disability experience food insecurity much more than their non-disabled peers. So before we can talk about expanding SNAP and stuff, I urge everyone to call their congressmen and their senators right now, because right now Congress is debating bills that would make it harder to be on Medicaid and make it harder to be on SNAP and restrict SNAP and Medicaid. So
Absolutely. It's clearly a defensive moment we're in, and thinking through what we had. Our last podcast was on the disability policy areas to watch right now. And if listeners want to go back to that one, can hear about all the things, including SNAP, Medicaid changes that are a real threat to the financial security and hunger for people with disabilities, that are increasing hunger. One question I have, Aaron, then is, obviously you're working to halt the advancement of certain types of legislation that you view as harmful, that I think are harmful. And I'm curious your thoughts on what might be opportunities for bipartisan collaboration right now, if any. What kinds of disability related legislation could advance for related to the financial security for people with disabilities and garner bipartisan support?
first of all, on the state level, I was very proud that a Republican colleague of mine, Delegate Kevin Hornberger, was my co-sponsor on legislation for the right to repair bill. And then I also, for my other special ed bill, which mandates the school systems post on their websites the services they offer to students in private or parochial schools, was also had bipartisan support. But on the federal level, I think if you look at what's called ABLE 3.0, sponsored by Chris Van Hollen, or the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, that would phase out the payment of subminimum wage to people with disabilities, while also giving states and entities that currently have 14C certificates the resources they need to make the transition. That's bipartisan too. I would say that disability is one of the few areas of bipartisan comity, that's COMITY, not comity, left in Congress today.
So there are, and it sounds like you've been really fruitful in your collaborations. I want to head back to what we were talking about a second ago with this warning for everyone, because I have you here. If the Trump administration does pass this bill on with Medicaid cuts, how will states respond, and how should states respond?
I wish they didn't, but we have to balance our budget unlike the federal government. So I expect states to respond to, because Medicaid's a state and federal partnership, with cuts to Medicaid, not because they're heartless, but they have to balance their budget. And so I think that could mean real trouble for HCBS services, because the institutional bias within Medicaid, where states are required to cover nursing home care, but they are not required to cover home and community-based services like assistance with activities of daily living, job coaching, etc. So it's not because they're heartless, but the fact is that they will have no choice if the Medicaid cuts go through to cut, and they get less money, to cut optional services like HCBS, simply because, unlike the federal government that can run a big deficit, states cannot.
So states have much limited fiscal capacity to handle.
Yes, and Medicaid
Right.
in most states is often one of the top expenses.
So you anticipate fewer HCBS waivers if
Or
this
longer
bill
waiting lists and
longer
things
waiting
like
lists.
that.
Okay. All right. And for researchers, this means we need to follow and track to see how people are living in the community, their well-being, and whether nursing home will increase. You'll actually see it a rise
Yeah, I
in
think
nursing
there's a
home
real
usage.
chance of reinstitutionalization if the cuts go through.
All right, we'll have to follow that very closely. And so, so you work at the state level, and I wonder what limitations at this in the state versus the federal level, and how do you engage in that when everything is so dependent on federal level to a degree? How does a state politician work in that kind of context? How do you think about it?
You do the best you can, and I'm not trying to be flippant, but it's a lot of divine intervention, because you're hoping for divine intervention because you really can't control the federal government. You advocate, but Trump does what he wants to do. But in some ways, the state is more fun than federal advocacy, because Congress isn't getting much done these days, and at the state level, we get stuff done.
Right. And I want to get back to, because on this, if you want to get stuff done, do you knock on the door of your elected officials? Do you call? Do you draft legislation?
Well, first of all, what you can do is, of course, if you're in your state, you can go to the Senate and click on your state, and it'll give you your senators' names. And for your House of Representatives member, you Google find your representative, house.gov, and you type in your zip code, and they'll tell you who it is. And at the state level, anybody can go to the Maryland General Assembly, and on the homepage, click on members, find my representative, enter their address, and then find out who their representatives are. I don't know how it works in other state and their state senator and their state delegates. I don't know how it works in other states, but I think every state and legislature has similar features on their website. Because remember, you pay their salary, so they're accountable to you.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about any legislative priorities, things to focus on, especially in relation to disability squeeze?
What I would just say, I would like to just say a general thing, which is if I had taken no for an answer, I don't think being born at 32 weeks, many people would have thought I was in the House of Delegates, but I just kept pushing, didn't take no for an answer. So I know it can be wearying, but keep fighting and shoot for the stars.
Delegate Kaufman, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Zach. It was an honor and privilege.